this meeting. When Mark asked me to come down and give a presentation with him, this is actually a similar talk that I gave last year at one of our CCA meetings in Pennsylvania. So I told him a little bit about what we did. I give a brief overview of the situation with herbicide resistance. Those of you who were in Wes's presentation just previous to this, he did a great job of setting things up, and now we're going to kind of look at actually putting these things into practice. So I'm going to give a brief overview here, about 10 minutes, and then Mark VanGessel is going to come and actually, he's been handing out some worksheets and so forth. We're going to spend some time actually working through different programs. We're going to provide a scenario and then actually look at these different modes or sites of action so you can actually determine whether we're using multiple modes of action and how many of those are effective against these target species. So if you don't have a handout, maybe raise your hand and Mark can give you a handout. There's a couple here and there. So what I want to do is, like I say, spend a few minutes talking here about resistance management and just kind of set the stage here. And we think about resistance to herbicides, and as Wes really alluded to, is there no herbicide is infallible. I mean, it seems like whatever we're putting up there, these weeds are able to take it and become resistant. So we need to watch closely for changes in our weed control, basically know your weeds, and this is where we get back to the old concept of scouting. All of a sudden, scouting kind of went out of favor a number of years ago. Now it's something that we need to really get back in to be on top of it, know what's out in the field, and then act appropriately as necessary. Select products based on need and not just routine. I think that's something that we've been talking about routinely. Include resistant management in crop management planning. So make sure we're rotating sites of action. Sometimes we call this mode of action or MOA, but again, sometimes these are interchangeable. Effective, more than one effective site of action, whether that be through a tank mix or sequential, through that season, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through these problem sets. And then, of course, avoid repeating and reusing the same types of herbicide sites of action, whether it be within the same year or multiple years. And then if there's any way to include non-chemical methods of control, I know in Pennsylvania, and I think it's the same here in Maryland, obviously tillage is a dirty word. But really, from our standpoint as a weed scientist, we find that it can be a necessary tool in a way to combat resistance. So it's something that if there's any way we can get that back into the rotation, it can actually help. And then I think, as Wes alluded to in his presentation, we have some of these residual herbicides. They're kind of come to the rescue for the time being, but we'll see how long they'll last. This is kind of an interesting chart. One of our weed scientists at the University of Wyoming put this together, looking at, in this case, the corn herbicides used by the site of action since 1990 all the way to about 2015. And what's interesting about this, you'll see kind of the trends over these years. So I try to parse some of these out. So the purple ones here, these are the ALSs, things like Resolve and Steadfast and so forth. Here's the dicamba, 2,4-D. This whatever color that is, like a dark orange. Here are the triazines. We used a lot of them in the 90s. Now we're using maybe less of them to some degree. Obviously, glyphosate hugely increased. When we got to the late 90s, early 2000s. The pre-grass herbicides, things like dual harness, obviously have kind of remained the same. And then, of course, these bleachers. Callisto, Balance, and so forth, since they were introduced back in the late 90s, those have continued to increase over the years. What's interesting, compare that now to soybeans. Look at the glyphosate right there in the middle. Look at the major impact since 96 all the way to now. And if you do notice here, we're starting to get a little bit of a decrease now in the use of glyphosate. Because I think obviously the issue with resistance. Another thing that we're starting to see more of, this kind of mint green color, the PPOs, Authority, Valor, and so forth. We see those on the uptick. But then actually the pre-grasses have kind of stayed have kind of stayed the same here as far as there's the utility. Another one that's kind of interesting, the prowl usage. Back in the 90s, we used a lot of prowl, or not a lot, but more prowl than we do now. And look where prowl is in the acreage now. So anyway, just kind of a quick overview of where we've come from. I think it's important to say that not all herbicides are created equal. And what we mean by this, I mean, we give a whole presentation on what makes one different from the other one, but just kind of in a brief nutshell, we kind of rank these by the risk. So these three, the group 1, 2, and 9, these are obviously high risk types of products. Whereas the moderate risk are HPPDs, PPOs, glufosinate, and triazines. We're going to group those in kind of the mid risk. And then the ones that are a little bit lower, things like the DNAs, that would be prowl, the PGRs, things like obviously dicamba, 2,4-D, and then these are the very long chain fatty acids. These are the pre-grass products, dual, harness, warrant, products like that. So again, there's reasons why we rank them like this. A lot of it depends on the site of action. A lot of it depends on the different mechanisms and so forth that occur. But really, the risk increases with frequency of use, the widespread usage, and then just kind of the good old over-reliance on these products over and over again. So if we think about some of the weeds that are of concern in our region for resistance, you notice the majority of these, and I'm not going to spend time on every single one of these, but in general, these are the ones that we're having more problems, whether they be here in the Delaware, Maryland area. I know we have a lot of these in Pennsylvania as well. You'll notice most of these are annuals. The only one that we don't have is not an annual is Johnson grass. So again, and some of these are more the small-seeded and broadleaves. So again, there's differing opinions on the small seed versus a larger seed, something like a ragweed, giant ragweed, or like a velvet leaf, for example, or cockleburr. But again, most of these are annuals, and they have certain characteristics that kind of lend them to becoming prone to resistance. So if we think about this concept of multiple versus effective modes or sites of action, I think as we get questions about this, people will say, well, I have at least maybe 3 or 4 different sites of action in my tank. But I guess my question is, are they all effective against that target species or a target species you're going after? So each component of a herbicide, whether it be a premix that you're getting already made up from the company, or a tank mix with a multiple site of action, is not necessarily effective on those target species. Okay, so the components of a premix or tank mix should be effective against target species, so you need at least two effective sites of action. Okay, so the timing also can play a part. We think about burn down versus residual versus post applications. Those all come into play as well as how we can rank them as their effectiveness versus just another type of mode of action. So again, the take-home message: just because we have multiple sites of action in a tank or in a program doesn't necessarily mean they're all effective against that target weed. So that's what we're going to do here this afternoon. We're going to spend some time actually picking apart some programs that we've some different scenarios. And we're going to look at the different sites of action. In this scenario, we're considering if you have at least 80% control, we're going to consider that an effective mode of action. So just kind of a generic example here, we have, let's say, herbicide product A and herbicide product B. If we're looking at this 4 different weed species, say we have mare's tail, horseweed, palmer, common ragweed, and giant foxtail. So if product A gives 9 or 90% control on horseweed, 70% on palmer, 60 on ragweed, 90 on foxtail, and then product B is these numbers, then the number of effective sites of action, in this case, we're only getting 1 effective site of action because we only have one of those products that would be greater than 80, 85% control. Same holds for this one, for palmer. And then in this case with common ragweed, none of them are effective. So even though we have two different modes of action in the tank, none of them are even effective against a ragweed. And then in this case with foxtail, we actually have two that would be considered effective. So where do we find this information? I think most of us are familiar now. We've been handing these posters out the last few years here. The Take Action posters that were heavily subsidized by the soybean boards and other industry folks. And if you need one of those, we have copies up here in the front if you need one of those. So please feel free to take those. And then also, where do you get the information about the effectiveness tables? You know, and we have certain guides. You know, Wes mentioned one of the guides that he has in North Carolina. We actually have a new Mid-Atlantic field crop weed management guide that we put together starting this past year, and we're updating it. We'll have a new update here by January. So look for the new guide for that. So just to kind of parse this apart a little bit more. If you think about the sites of action, I think most of us are familiar with looking at the herbicide labels, you know, with these group numbers. You know, we're really, you know, I think most of the different pest management disciplines are using certain kind of group numbers, or whether it's a number or a letter. We typically stick with the number. So you'll always see, at least on the newer labels, these specific numbers related to what types of herbicide group numbers are within that premix or that active ingredient of that product. So in this case, if you look at something like Fierce XLT, it actually has three different unique modes of action. It has a number 2, a number 14, and a number 15. And that's where these charts really come into play if we want to look at the different types of modes of action, what herbicides, actual trade names fall under that. If we have different ones related to premixes. If you look at a premix such as Instigate, for example, you can see it contains rimsulfuron plus mesotrione, or the trade name would be Resolve and Calisto. So again, that's where these charts really come into practice. And again, it just kind of shows, you know, the different the site of action, and then also how many weed species are currently resistant to that, and these numbers continue to grow year after year. Here's just an example of a table that we pulled out of our weed management guide, and you'll notice here, so if we use a product such as Classic, so it's a group 2 herbicide, for looking at a weed, in this case Palmer amaranth, we're getting 90% control, but one thing you have to notice about it, we do have a footnote there. So the footnote would mention that we have ALS suspected population, or we have actually some populations of ALS resistant Palmer in the region. So you kind of have to, you know, adhere to some of those warnings as well. And again, these ratings are based on this percentage scale, are basically from 0 to 10. So for example, as I mentioned before, if you have one that's labeled as 8 or rated as 8, you can expect about 80% control. So again, these are the types of tables that you'll find in these weed management guides as well. So what we want to do now, and if we can go ahead and turn on the lights here, we're going to spend about 20 minutes or so. Everybody should have received one of these handouts, and if you want to pair up, you know, feel free to pair up. When we work in groups, that's fine. What we want you to do is complete these worksheets, and then what we're going to do is we want you to determine which program would be the best choice, having the most effective modes of action or sites of action for the different programs that we're giving you as examples here. So just in general here, and you can read the scenario on the top of your sheet there. So the situation is you have mare's tail, which is glyphosate resistant. You have Palmer amaranth, which is both glyphosate and ALS resistant. You have common ragweed. In this case, it's susceptible to all herbicides, or those we don't really have any resistance with this one at this point. And then giant foxtail. And you're in a no-till field. And in these cases, you're going to have a 2 herbicide application, so a split application So now you need to consider what kind of effectiveness you're going to get from all these different herbicides within these two different scenarios, or these two different applications, I should say. So, Mark, you want to take over and kind of, yeah. Does anybody need a pencil? Everybody have their own? I guess everybody got them in their packets, so that's good they have them. You need the key?
Must have handed mine out.
Oh, here.
Okay, so, like Dwight said, everything is the information we've kind of pared down and put in these handouts. This information is available in the chart and in our pesticide guide. So afterwards, be free to take a look and look it over, and any of those charts. Be sure grab one if you'd like. So let's look at the handout, and feel free to separate them if you want to. And what we're going to do, let's go to page. We'll forget about that. Let's go to page 3. Bottom right-hand corner, page 3. This is the chart. So we've got glyphosate-resistant maristem, glyphosate and ALS-resistant palmer, common ragweed, giant foxtail. We want to fill in here on our chart. We're looking at how well, so our first program given to us by our consultant said we want to look at program A, which is 2,4-D glyphosate boundary applied before planting and FlexStar GT post-emergence. So with the looking at this chart compared to the chart on page number 1, we go ahead and fill in what's missing here. So on glyphosate-resistant maristem, boundary. What can we expect out of boundary on that glyphosate-resistant maristem applied post-emergence? Nothing. An N. What about on glyphosate on common ragweed? What can we expect out of post-emergence of glyphosate on common ragweed? 9+. Okay. What about giant foxtail with boundary, post-emergence? None. Okay. Now, of that post-emergence, that burn down application that we have, those 3 products, what are they giving us for residual control? So how about the, still on page 1, looking at that chart on the right-hand side, what is boundary giving us for residual control of horseweed, mare's-tail? None. Wait a minute.
It should be 9.
9. Giving us 9. The metribuzin in there is helping us out with residual control. Well, at least it works in Delaware, Ron. Doesn't work in Delaware. Trust me. Glyphosate-resistant residual control on our palmer with glyphosate. What are we getting out of it? None. Okay. Let's jump down here to FlexStar. FlexStar GT, which is a combination of glyphosate and reflex. What is that giving us for post-emergence control of the horseweed? It's resistant. This one's a little tricky. I give it about a 6 because we do get some activity, nothing to be real excited about, but initial control we get a little bit there, so it's certainly not controlled. The glyphosate-resistant palmer and ALS-resistant palmer with residual activity out of FlexStar. We're looking at page 2 now. Excuse me, we'll switch to page 2. What do we get in there? 9? Yep. Yes. Then what we're doing is we're adding up the number of effective active ingredients that we have here. So with the total number of sites of active ingredients that we have here, how many do we have listed? We've got 4, 9, 5, 15. That's 4 of them. These are all duplicates. These are we've got 5. 4, 9, 5, 15, and 14 down here. So we got 5 sites of active ingredients. But as far as those active ingredients are actually giving us an 8 or better, we've only got 2 for the glyphosate-resistant Maristel. We've got 3 for the glyphosate-resistant horseweed and glyphosate and ALS-resistant palmer. 4 on the common ragweed, 2 on the giant foxtail. So there's 4 more other charts behind there. I'd like you to work through those based on using the charts on page 1 and 2. Look at the 4 other programs and look at the effectiveness, what we might expect out of it, and then how many different total sites of actions or mode of action differences do we have. Dwight and I will be going around if anyone has any questions.
So we'll do this for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we want to go over all these, and we want to talk about some of the other factors that go into these different programs. Does anybody need one of these mode of action charts?
Thank you, sir.
You want one of those?
Thank you. Dwight?
Oops, I'm sorry.
You're looking at what does it do for post-emergence as well as bringing from residual activity. How do we get our site?
Anybody need a mode of action chart? Mode of action chart. Chart. Anybody need a mode of action chart? Need one? I've got more, so no, that's okay. I've got more. Let me. I'll be back. I've got plenty more. Oh yeah, there's some in the back there. You guys need a chart? Chart? Todd, do you need a chart?
Can't read. Thank you. I need a money.
Need charts here?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
That just kind of holds your breath in that period where
Uh-oh, we have a heckler. Yeah.
I got to find out how many Jerry's guys got because he's got.
Well, I did last year, not last year, just not in October. I did it a year ago in
I'm
2015.
going to do it with Ken's guys because a couple of those.
You need some extra copies?
Yeah,
Or?
just 2 or 3 of them.
Okay.
That'd be great. Is this your last of this show? No. I'll get a card because I don't think Jerry's kids have been through that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And they're burning up my phone, and I'm out trying to sell corn. I'm like, how do I kill this? I'm turning into a grouchy old man. Turning, not just some of us would say I'm already dead.
Which part?
Oh, you just hold it. Okay, there we go.
Oh, so we got dual speakers?
Yeah, that's just enough.
information that's in the guide as well as on this herbicide chart. It's a matter of having the materials available to work go through an exercise like this. And not because we wrote it, but this is a damn good publication. And,
Because we wrote it.
That's and these herbicide classification charts, as Dwight mentioned, are available through the generosity of the soybean board. There's copies up here. Be sure to, if you don't have one already, be sure to get one. So, we looked at it. We looked at, we did program A as a group. Let's move on and let's look at program B here. Get out of the way.
I think probably right here.
So, for program B, with our mare's tail, we've got 2,4-D. This one had 2,4-D glyphosate and Valor XLT as the burn down. Valor XLT is a combination of Valor and Classic. You have a group 14 and a group 2 in there. This is our burn down control as well as our residual control. Particularly as we start looking at these resistant weeds, Palmer in particular, we have to be aware of what are we getting from residual activity. Post-emergence, we had glyphosate plus cadet. What do we got? Straight post-emergence, and then what are they bringing us from a residual standpoint as far as effectiveness? So glyphosate, we looked at the number of effective mode of action, so different modes of action that gave us at least 8 or higher. So with the 2,4-D, we've got an 8. With the Valor XLT, we're getting an 8. While this residual activity of Valor XLT is giving us a 9. Remember, that's not a new site of action. So we have effectively two sites of action there. Now, you can argue, and probably rightfully so, is that are we getting residual activity out of both the Valor and the Classic? You know, as long as we don't have ALS resistant than horseweed, we probably are. But you know, for the simplicity here, we kept it with just as a prepackaged mix. Glyphosate plus Palmer, we've got 2 effective mode of actions. What do you notice about that Palmer, though, with the 2 different modes of action? One of them is an effective mode of action that we're using in our burn down. It's not, and Palmer is being one of those species that germinates early and throughout the year. It's not really helping us out with the bulk of our population that might be germinating after our burn down. So while we're getting good control with that 2,4-D, it's not helping us from a residual standpoint. So we only have one product here, the Valor XLT, that's helping us out. While we have 2 sites of action here, this is not a particularly strong program for glyphosate-resistant and ALS-resistant Palmer. Common ragweed, we've got a good program here built for common ragweed with 3 sites of action, and giant foxtail, we've got 1 site of action. Any questions, comments about this particular one?
It's not a good program.
It's not a good program. Thank you. Program C. This is 2,4-D, glyphosate, and Anthem. Anthem is very similar to Zidua. It's from FMC. Our burn down activity, as well as what's it bringing from residual. Our post herbicides, it's a combination of Liberty plus Warrant. What do they bring in post emergence, and then what do they bring in from a residual standpoint? With our horseweed, we've got good control with 2,4-D early burn down, and then we've got good control of Liberty post emergence. It's given us 2 different sites of action, fairly effective. On glyphosate resistant Palmer, 2,4-D, again, we're getting 9. That's the only one, though, that's helping us from a burn down standpoint. From our residual, we're getting a 9 out of Anthem. Post-emergence, we're getting good control post-emergence with Liberty. And then we're also getting residual control of that combination when we have Warrant. So we're looking, though, at only 3 different sites of action. Because remember, Anthem is a 15, Warrant's a 15. That's not a different site of action. Common ragweed, we've got a 9, 9 plus, 9 with Liberty. We got 3 sites of action. And on our giant foxtail, we got glyphosate 9 plus. We're getting good residual activity out of the Anthem. And again, poster activity out of Liberty, residual out of Warrant. But again, Warrant is the same site of action as Anthem. We haven't really expanded it there. What do you think about this program? Better.
It's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. Let's look at one more here with program D, where we've got glyphosate, sharpen, and prefix as part of our burn down. What are they bringing from a residual standpoint? And then post-emergence, we have extreme. Extreme is a combination of glyphosate and pursuit, burn down activity, as well as residual activity. On our glyphosate-resistant mare's tail, initial activity, we're getting we're saying an 8 out of sharpen, but that's the only active ingredient that's being effective on that mare's tail, giving us 80% or higher. On the glyphosate-resistant palmer, ALS-resistant palmer, the prefix, we're getting about an 8 plus out of that prefix because of the reflex component of it. We're getting about an 8 plus out of residual activity out of there, again out of both the dual and the reflex. We're not really getting any post activity out of palmer. So we really only have one site of action here that's helping us. You may say 2 if you consider the dual and the reflex separate. And then with the common ragweed, we've got 9 out of the glyphosate. We've got 8 plus out of dual and reflex. 8 out of prefix. 9 out of extreme. But as far as different sites of actions, we only have 3 unique sites of actions there. Not a particularly good program either. But this is the exercise that you need to think about when you're thinking about multiple sites of action. You've heard everyone talk about we need different modes of action, we need multiple modes of action. This is not necessarily a simple process, but this is the process you need to look through. And not only what is the site of action, but is it an effective site of action? You want to take it from there?
I think we have one more, don't we?
Well, we weren't.
Okay.
We'll skip E and
Okay.
go on to some of the other things.
Yeah, so okay, thanks. So what we want to do now is just kind of spend a little time talking about other considerations. You know, so we realize this process of what we just went through is relatively black and white, and of course there's a lot of nuances when it comes to putting these programs together. You know, if we think about, you know, obviously we're not going to have time to talk about every single one of these other considerations on this slide here, but you know, obviously as we talked about, you know, as I alluded to earlier, the fact about tillage. You know, if there's any way we can get tillage in there, that would be considered another, you know, mode of action, if you will. You know, so that would be another, you know, positive thing if we could get it in there. You know, same thing with cultivation. You know, cover crops. You know, we didn't really bring that into the mix. But again, you know, the aspect of having a cover crop in there can be a positive thing. You know, from a weed suppression standpoint, allows, you know, some again another kind of mechanism in the system. But again, if there's anybody who's doing maybe fall burn down, for example, sometimes, you know, fall burn down and cover crop sometimes can collide as well. So that would bring another element into the mix where you need to really think about whether you can include that. And then the whole thing about costs. You know, we didn't really even get into that. As Wes mentioned in his presentation, you know, we're up to what, $70, $80 plus per acre programs now with some of these ones in the south. And I think, you know, we're going to approach that as well in our area if we're not careful. And then the whole thing, you know, about rates. You know, I think I heard it best when somebody said a half rate of herbicide A and a half rate of herbicide B doesn't give you an effective rate. Okay, so even though you have maybe two different effective modes of action, if they're being used at a full rate, cutting things in half is not going to give it to you. So that's where we really do stress, you know, full rates with these things. And again, the full rate is going to drive that cost up, and you know, we get that. And then weed size, obviously, another huge factor that needs to be considered, especially with Palmer. You know, within a day or two, it can easily double in size, and by the time you get out there and scout, and then you figure out what you're going to spray, you know, the two or 3 days may have passed. Well, that weed could easily be double or triple in size. And then different label restrictions, you know, row spacing. You know, we sometimes we don't give this enough credit. You know, thinking about, you know, 30-inch beans versus a 15-inch, or you know, if you want to, you can go back to a drill. You know, drop it down to maybe a 7.5 inch. So that comes into play for helping from a crop competition standpoint. You know, canopy closure. Here's another one. You know, this whole aspect of spray coverage, and this is really going to come into play, especially now that we're getting, you know, the whole extend and enlist systems coming into play here. You know, now that we're using these drift reducing nozzles with large droplet sizes, trying to put some of these PPO contact herbicides or Liberty glufosinate products through these drift reducing nozzles, now all of a sudden we don't get good spray coverage. But the label says if you want to use, say, for example, Extendamax, we have to use a drift reducing nozzle. So how do we put all these things together in this whole program? Timing of application, obviously, as we saw here, is a big factor. Tank mixing. Here's one that you know, we've been talking about. Again, goes back to kind of this cultural standpoint of, you know, making sure we stop seeds. As we talked about, you know, one weed can produce hundreds of thousands of seeds per plant. Just stopping that really can provide a positive impact. You know, Mark, you were saying in one of your presentations that what 80% of the weeds next season came from this year. Is that correct? Something of that nature. That it's.
I've heard it vary a little bit, but anywhere from like roughly 50%. It's a fairly high percentage of weeds that germinate. Very high percentage of the weeds that are going to germinate in 2017 were made in 2016.
Yeah. So stopping seed production this year really has a huge impact on what you're going to see out there next season with these annuals. So just keeping that in mind. And then again, the number of applications kind of goes back to the whole issue with you know, the cost, you know, the understanding the periods of weed emergence. You know, at least in our area with Palmer, you know, we can expect from easily like in April to August. And again, I'm talking Pennsylvania because that's where I'm from. So we can expect an April to August germination. And that's something that we've never seen before with all these weeds we're dealing with. We're used to these smaller periodicity aspects where they only maybe germinate in a very kind of defined band, maybe over a few or several week period. Now we're talking over a few months or more. And that's something that we're just not used to. So having that aspect of overlapping residuals, and then rotating to other crops, you know, that's where, you know, that can be a positive, at least in our area, having this diversity of cropping systems. You know, unlike, you know, just a corn on corn type of a system or a bean on bean. So having, you know, getting different types of control from one crop to the next, and then of course just using different multiple herbicides. So I guess any questions? I realize we kind of blew through this pretty quick. We only have a couple minutes left here. Mark, you have any closing comments you want to say to the group? Any questions?
This year we found Bill Dot planting green cottontail for summer heat emergence on the grasses. It was full of palm. Grown in, where was it? Oregon?
Colorado.
Colorado, grown in Colorado. It's a crop like for rye we buy. It's not really regulated. They're grown in. So that moved in here all the way to out there. And I've seen several articles since then about CRP plantings, wildlife plantings, where our sunflowers coming from that the United States feed the birds and the white strike all the time. So all
Yeah.
these things like this Palmer moving in here.
Right, and that's a good point, Todd. We're seeing the same thing too. You know, I think that's one thing. You know, obviously with the cover crop thing being huge, you really know where you're getting your cover crop seed from. You know, is it certified seed? You know, or is it going to contain a lot of potential weed seed? Same thing with these CRP plantings, seed mixes. You know, I think that could be another area where you know these things are seeded, and then especially if you have these mixed forbs, you know, not only you just have maybe like a switchgrass, but now you have other broadleaf type species in there. Now we can't rely on things like crossbow and milestone and those types of products. Now we have to think about those types of plantings, and then if Palmer gets a foothold in those, they can really go gangbusters because it's very difficult to control it in that situation. So you're right. See, it kind of goes back to the old cultural good old agronomics. When we deal with these types of situations. Any other questions or comments? If not, I think anything else, Mark? If not, I think the CCAs each have been handed out. Are we good with that, or?
So if you need Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or West Virginia credits, they're up here. Color sheets, they're just signed in before you leave.
And if you need these mode of action charts, we have a big box up here. Take one or two copies. All right, thanks everybody.